Right? That's what he's saying here. What man is there, if his son will ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? See, the first one is just something kind of bad. This next one, if he asks a fish, will he give him that's something deadly and dangerous. In other words, is God dealing out deadly, dangerous things? The intent of this is to say, no, of course not. Verse 11. Listen, if you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. Think about this. Just carnal, ordinary, run-of-the-mill people on earth, not specially enlightened about holy, godly things. He says, you then being evil know how to give good gifts to your children. How much more? Notice, not how much less, but how much more shall your Father, which is in heaven, give good things to them that ask Him. Now, I talk to people all the time, well, maybe not all the time, but from time to time I talk to people who, some terrible thing has come into their lives. Some terrible thing has happened. And they'll say to me, well, God sent this to me to teach me. Or God put this in my life to make me more holy, or something of that nature. God sent this to me. God sent me this deadly disease. I would like to say, no, God did not send you a deadly disease. Jesus said here, if a son asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? Why does he say that? He wants us to know that God doesn't deal in deadly things. Now, let's say on the other side, there are bad things that come into our lives. There are deadly things that come into our lives. I'm just saying God didn't send them. I'm saying they came from somewhere other than God, because God doesn't have serpents, He doesn't have scorpions, He doesn't deal in deadly, hurtful things. See, Jesus is saying all of this to show us that what the Father is like is a Father, a loving Father. The reason I paused there, the thought just passed through my mind in having these conversations. This is the next thing somebody will say when I make that argument. They'll next say, well, God has a different standard of what's good than we do. God knows better than we do what's good. He has a different standard of what's really good. And what it's saying here is, no, God does not have a different standard. He is just like we are, except more good. He's just like we are, except He's better. If you then, being evil, know how to give good things to your children, how much more will your Father which is in heaven? Notice, He says, we have a Father that's in heaven. We have a Father that's in heaven. He gives good things to them that ask Him. Okay, let me show you another one that talks about the nature of God the Father. His heart is open to us. His ears are open to us. He wants to send good things into our lives. Here's another story that makes the same point. Luke's Gospel, chapter 15. This is a very familiar story. Verse 11. He said, Jesus said, he began to tell a story. A certain man had 2 sons. Now this is getting ready to be a story that you probably know as the story of the prodigal son. Now at the top of my Bible, I wish I could turn around and show it to you. At the top of my Bible right there, it says at the top, they've written in the margin, the prodigal son. The story of the prodigal son. And that's what most people consider this to be a story about. You've probably heard that story, and I'm going to read it to you in just a moment. But I want to suggest to you, the prodigal son is one of the stories. And by the way, prodigal means wasteful. We think prodigal means he went away and left, which he did. Prodigal means he's wasteful. He wasted what he had from the father. This story is not about the prodigal son, though he's one of the characters. This story is about the father. This story is about what the father's really like. He said a certain man had 2 sons. And by the way, before I begin to read, let me just say in the context, the 2 sons are, if you wanted to know who the 2 sons are, who Jesus meant for the 2 sons to represent, let's just back up for a minute. I think this is helpful to understand why he told this story. Go back to the beginning of chapter 15. Chapter 15, verse 1. Then drew near unto him, that's Jesus, all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. The down and outers. Publicans are tax collectors. They were held in bad reputation in those days. The tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees, these are the holy people, the godly, the people who seem to be, in other words, the people who seem to be the worst and the sinners drew near to Jesus to hear him. And the people who seemed to be the holy ones murmured and were upset. The Pharisees and the scribes murmured. That means they were complaining. And they said, this man receives sinners. Did you notice back in chapter 1 it said, as many as received him? Do you remember that? As many as received him? Guess what? As many as receive him, he receives them. When we receive him, he receives us. And this man, it says, they said, this man receives sinners. Thank God he does. He does receive sinners. This man receives sinners and eats with them. Now, who are the characters that are in relation to Jesus here? Well, on the one hand, we have the sinners who drew near to hear him. On the other hand, we have the Pharisees, the holy, seemingly holy people who are complaining about him, complaining about the fact that he received sinners. These are the two groups. Did you know these are the two sons in the story we're going to read about? Now go back to chapter 15, verse 11. Chapter 15, verse 11. A certain man had two sons. The two sons represent the Pharisees on the one hand, who want everybody to think they're so holy, and then the sinners and the tax collectors. Now let's see how this plays out in the story. But remember, this story is telling us what the Father is really like. That's what I want to focus on here. Verse 12. The younger of them said unto his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me, and he divided unto him his living. In other words, he says, give me my inheritance that you're going to, the inheritance I would get when you die. Give it to me now. How about that? That's not very nice, is it? But that's what he did. And so he gave it to him. He divided unto them his living. Verse 13 said, Not many days after the younger son, that's the one who asked for his part right now, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance in riotous living. When it says he wasted his substance, the word for that is prodigal. Prodigals, that's why he's called the prodigal. He wasted it. In other words, he took what he got from the Father and he wasted it. He threw it away. Now what we would say is, that rascal, he ought to get what's coming to him. You know why? Because we tend to take the stance of the Pharisees. That's not the way the Father looks at it. He wasted his substance with riotous living. Guess what? We can't afford to look at anybody else and say they've wasted what they got from God, because we also have wasted things. Now, you might have done better than me, and I might have done something better than the other person, but all of us have done things wrong and have made mistakes. So we ought to all be able to identify. That's the intent for which Jesus is telling this, and to reveal to us the Father. Okay, he wasted his substance with riotous living. You know what riotous living is? This is so polite. King James language, riotous. That just means wild partying. He wasted his substance with wild, riotous living. He's not doing very well. He's doing bad. Verse 14. And when he had spent all, not part of it, but all of it, he wasted it all. Then the next thing is, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And we would tend to say, what we would likely do is stand back and say, well, he's getting what's coming to him. He's getting what he deserved. That's not what Jesus thinks. Verse 15. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of the country. See, he wasted everything he had. Now there's a famine. He went and, in other words, took a job. Joined himself to a citizen of that country who sent him into the fields to feed swine. Now, this would be, especially for Jews living in Israel in the first century with their food laws, this would be the worst job you could think of. Not only do you have to have a humiliating menial job, but it's swine who are considered to be unclean. Feed swine. And he would fain, in other words, he would have desired to fill his belly with the husks that the swine did eat. In other words, he was so hungry, he would have eaten what the pigs are eating. Now, I haven't ever been raised on a farm, and I've never had pigs, but I've seen them on TV, and I've seen what they eat. Have you ever seen pictures of what pigs eat? I'm telling you what, this is mighty hungry. When you want to look at the pigs, what the pigs are eating, and you say, I'd like to eat that myself, this is a desperate, terrible situation. A hopeless, helpless, far away from, he's fallen very far from God here, you could say. He would have eaten what the pigs were eating. Verse 17. Listen, this is important. When he came to himself, in other words, he had a change of mind, he had a change of heart. He said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. He says, he's come to himself and he realizes, I have really fouled up here. I have wasted what I got. I have wasted what I had from the Father. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to arise and go to my Father, and I'm going to say to him, I've wasted what I had. I've wasted what you get. So I'm no more worthy to be your son. So just let me work for you. Let me be a servant. That's his idea. He knows at least the Father has enough to take care of his servant. So he says, I'm not worthy to be the son anymore because of what I've done. See, this is what the change of mind and the change of attitude on behalf of this son. But again, why am I reading this to you today? Because I want us to notice what the Father is like.